The time is 10:04 a.m., and we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. Today is Friday, November 15th, 2019, and we welcome everyone. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and Chance has agreed to lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
We will now have roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martha Gale Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Clayton Black.
Present.
Jim Jeffries.
Present.
Tony Pena. Buster Renfro. Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
And Lisa Sprinkle.
Present.
We have two board members that are absent today, having given prior notice. Mr. Pena had some business matters that kept him in Lubbock, and Mr. Renfro, who was able to attend our board workshop yesterday, was unable to attend today because of a prior family commitment. I would request a motion that we excuse both Mr. Pena and Mr. Renfro's absence.
Madam Chair, I move that we excuse the absences of Mr. Renfro and Mr.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Black to excuse Mr. Pena and Mr. Renfro's absence. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Speaking of attendance, I want to take this opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, when we most likely have the most attendance, probably here in the room and online, to remind everybody that the February board meeting is your chance to get 2 to 4 hours of continuing education credit. So I think you and I were speaking about the cost of education, and I think we did the math. That's about $75 if you get 4 hours while you're here. So that's a free 4 hours of continuing ed if you come to the February board meeting. So we hope to see you here. I also wanted to make note of the fact that I'm going to try and move executive session to land at about 12:30 or sometime in the lunch hour to coincide with lunch. And so we might either move it up or move it back on the agenda, depending on how quickly we get through the other items. On to agenda item number 3, we want to recognize some departing board members and welcome some new ones. Mrs. Yanuzzi couldn't be here today, but Mr. Jeffries wanted to say a few words on our behalf to recognize her service.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been a real pleasure to serve on the board with Mr. Janese. She and I worked together on the Education Committee, and her fresh perspective added substantially to each issue we tackled. She's quick with a smile and a reassuring comment. We'll certainly miss her, but because of her interests, abilities, and drive, we know she will continue to positively contribute to the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. And Mr. Sostre also couldn't be here today, but Mr. Black wanted to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So Alex isn't here, but I'm going to speak as if he is right in front of me. So hopefully, Alex, you're listening and watching. If not, maybe you can catch this. But yeah, just real quickly, Alex, I wanted to tell you that you've been an invaluable asset to the board, and thank you so much for your service and contribution serving on the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board. I've watched you grow over the past few years, and it's been amazing to watch. And also, I've had the privilege of serving with you on my committee, the Finance Committee, and it's been quite interesting, the input that you've been able to give and the different ways that you see things. I bring something to the table that's different and have a different outlook. So did Mr. Pena, being a finance guy, and then you being an attorney. It was nice having your input and a different way of thinking and analyzing things. So thank you so much for your service, your contribution on the board, and on my finance committee as well. furthermore, I hope that you pursue other avenues and will continue to serve on other boards, et cetera. And I wish you the best in your personal life and endeavors moving forward. So thanks again, Alex, and consider me a friend for life. And if you ever want to hang out here in Austin, I'll be here every 3 months. So thank you, Mr. Sostre. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Black. And of course, our former chair, Ms. Jamie Whitcliffe, is here today with us, and Mrs. Reed Lynch wanted to say a few words. They served together for several years and developed a friendship, so she wanted to say a few words on behalf of the board.
I'm going to come right up here because I like to look at Jamie. It was 8 years ago when Jamie Whitcliffe arrived at the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board. That's when Jamie's rodeo began. Jamie was appointed to the board in 2011, elected as chair in 2014, re-elected in 2015. Also in 2016, Jamie was appointed as chair by the governor. She has served on almost every TALC board committee and has been especially active in enforcement. We've had good times and challenging times. Jamie, with a steady hand and size 7 spurs, has steered us through them all. Jamie's been fair, honest, tireless, determined, and the adjuster of Kristen and Dion's notebook. On my first day as a new board member, I didn't know exactly what to expect, where to sit, what to say, and even what I could possibly contribute. Jamie strolled in at breakfast with her carefully prepared notebook, yellow stickies, and a used red pen. She came up to me and she said, "Girl, I love your suit." I said, "That's a good leader." I said, "That's a good leader." And it was a beginning of a real dear and loving relationship. Jamie has driven this little herd of 9 through some deep and muddy waters, skillfully nudging us from the rear and keeping us together, even when we had a wandering stray. Jamie's attempt was always, first and foremost, to bring Texas appraisers to green pastures, and all the while fostering public trust. Last year, Jamie required a little medical procedure. She deliberated at length when to schedule it. When would be a good time between board meetings, expert witness testimony, a grandchild's birthday party, her sister's choir concert, and round up with Gerald at the ranch? Jamie had family and Texas all together, all important. In Jamie's way, she selected a date and never missed a step or a board meeting. She did keep us on track. I know everyone joins me in recognizing this exceptional trail boss and leader. Her contributions and sacrifices during this cattle drive speak for themselves. The agency and board members appreciate your service, and they will miss you. And Jamie, I will miss you. Happy trails from your #1 ranch hand and vice chair. And then we have
Madam Chair, any chance I can say a few words? Thank you. Goodness, it feels different on this side of the dais, I gotta tell you. First of all, you don't get to sit down, and secondly, the microphone, kind of pops around when you move it. I wonder if that's on purpose. I just wanted to take just a second after having been in this room with a lot of you for a long time to let you know how much the opportunity to serve the great state of Texas has meant to me. I'd like to say thanks to the 2 governors that took positions allowing me to sit at the dais and to have some voice in the regulatory world for Texas appraisers. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to have served in that capacity. I'm also thankful to the stakeholders that have been consistent and persistent over time to give us input to the industry. I will tell you that in this service, my opportunity to communicate with you all has made a significant difference, both in my professional outlook on things and in my personal life. I've had the opportunity to get to know some of you, and that has been a fabulous reward for the service to the state of Texas. I'd also like to thank the staff of this organization for the professional way you run this place. People don't truly understand that the heavy lifting happens in the trenches. We do have a very dedicated board, and they are always on task trying to find innovative ways to make things better for our industry. But it's easy to come up with the ideas. The hard work happens out here, and you guys have never let us down. I cannot tell you how many times I have at the last minute reached out and said, I don't understand, I need, I want, where am I supposed to be, that they are not at the ready hand providing the information necessary to be able to achieve the board goals. Not everyone is that lucky, and you can look around any regulatory agencies in the state and see that. This board has taken a very front seat approach over the last 8 years to create policy, and this staff has never wavered in terms of standing behind us to get those things done. Specifically, some of you have really gone above and beyond, and I appreciate those things. Even when we disagreed, you continued to move forward to fulfill my request. And so, Dion, for always having me where I'm supposed to be, and for never laughing when I say, where am I staying this time? And just telling me where to go and what my confirmation number is, and all the other things you do to keep this board organized. Thank you very much. Tony, you know, I don't talk politics. I'm all about service. And so for always trying to keep me on the right path and in the right lane as it comes to trying to move things forward for the state of Texas, thank you. Doug, you sat beside me for a long time, so occasionally placing your hand across what I was about to say or do, and reminding me that I was on a microphone. No, you've been always good to answer my telephone call and to try and give me your best effort at guiding what the organization wanted to do, and for giving me reign to do those things that I felt like were the things that needed to be done on behalf of the board. Kristen, for your wise counsel always. Again, night, day, evening, weekend, I could count on the fact that even if she didn't answer the phone right then, she was available. Those are not requirements of their job. Those are dedicated individuals, professionals trying to help us move forward. To all the numbers folks and all of the folks that keep the rest of the organization going, from our webpage up to our press releases done correctly, sincerely, we couldn't do it without you, and we really appreciate that. You know, I've learned in life when you strive to make a difference, you'll have some success and you'll have some failures. And my service, it was far from flawless, but it was sincere. And it was sincere with a lot of help from a lot of folks who were also sincerely just trying to move us down the right path. To my fellow board members, past and present, continue to strive to make that difference. It's important. It's important for this little small organization that represents 1% of the Texas real estate licensees in the world of the state of Texas, that you stay focused on what we're working on, what we're doing, keep our seat at the table, keep an open mind and open voice, and continue to make us better. You all are the reward for the service that I've given. The friendships that I have made, the professional opportunities that I have had to get to know some of you have been priceless. But sincerely, for those of you that are new coming on this board, get to know these people. They're good folks. And I have the biggest reward I have is some lifetime friendships, both inside this organization and across the aisle. Carrie, Avis, I appreciate you guys driving today to see me. Avis chaired the Texas Real Estate Commission for a long time while I served in my capacity, and was a catalyst in these organizations opening communication at a higher level. And Carrie both served as our general counsel for a long period of time, and then served as the general counsel for TREC, and continues to be a resource to me today when I have a real estate question as it relates to especially the practice of real estate. That's the first telephone call I make if I want to be sure I know that the answer is complete. So I want to leave you with this thought, continue to do good, but when all else fails, hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and keep doing good. Thank you all.
I think Commissioner Oldmixon also wanted to say a few words.
I need to talk to you, not just be at the on the tape. So, first of all, I just wanted to say, Madam Chair, one more time in your presence. You led this agency through a transition from a time when it was chronic shortfalls. We couldn't quite measure up to our federal oversight. We had great staff and worked really hard, but we were challenged in ways that you helped us to overcome. And so you were a part of we're here when we wrote and implemented the AMC legislation. You were here for the very first time in 2013 when we got a flawless report from the appraisal subcommittee, and you challenged us to maintain that, and we have. And so I want to thank you for that. You were here through our engagement and development of Arrow, which is one of the wonderful benefits of having a regulatory body for a state work hand in hand with those in other states and provide both receive and provide the lessons that we've learned here. And you were very generous in allowing us to do that. And you were here as we underwent the sunset process and took a front seat role in that and helped us get through that. And today, most of that will come to fruition. I'll say something about that later. So, one, I wanted to say, Gerald, thank you for supporting Jamie in all of her service to the agency. And Madam Chair, you have earned that title for life. On behalf of the staff, thank you so much.
And I believe that that Mr. Bolton would also like to say a few words.
Jamie, I'll be very, this will be simple. I just thank you for your leadership, for your mentorship, and for your counsel, excuse me, and most of all, for your friendship. Thank you.
Jamie's shoes are very big shoes to fill, and I'm glad to have such an outstanding example of how to lead this board. So thank you, Jamie. We would also like to welcome some new members. We have Ms. Stephanie Robinson. She's from McKinney, Texas, where she is the Chief Operations Officer for New Life Industries. And we have Ms. Lisa Sprinkle of El Paso, Texas. She is a retired paralegal, which gives us the distinct advantage as we wade through statute and rules. Both Ms. Sprinkle and Ms. Robinson came in on Wednesday for our final rounds of interviews for the new commissioner position as Commissioner Oldmixon is retiring. And they have jumped right in. They were at the workshop yesterday. They've asked good questions and are both very engaged, and we are very glad to have both of these new members on the board.
Thank you.
As most of you know, this is my first board meeting since being appointed. When the governor's office asked me to chair the board, I was, of course, humbled and honored to take on such a great responsibility. As I contemplated the request, I wanted to make sure that I was the right person for the job and that this was the right time for me to serve. Their faith in me and the directive made it an easy decision. I've been charged with furthering the agenda of creating a leaner and more efficient government while protecting the public interest and increasing the transparency between the agency and stakeholders. I believe I'm up for the task. I think it's important for you to know that I am a second-generation appraiser. My father is an appraiser, my brother is an appraiser, my sister is the managing partner at an appraisal firm. Appraisals helped put me through college, and they gave me my first job of taping pictures into reports back when we used to do that. Now, as a part of my job, I speak to appraisers all over the state of Texas every day. This is my community, and it has been for most of my life. From walking the halls with the commissioner almost a decade ago at the Capitol, to sitting on the AMC Advisory Committee, to serving as an officer with FACT, I've been unknowingly preparing for this role for a long time. It is my hope that I honor the mission of this board in my service. Thank you all for welcoming me. That takes us on to agenda item number 4, which is the appointment of board members to the vacancies that have been created by the new appointments. We have vacancies on both the education and budget committees. And I have asked some of my other board members if they would fill those spots and serve until the regularly scheduled appointments at the February board meeting. So after consultation with them, the board members that will be serving on the Education Committee with Mr. Jeffries will be Mrs. Robinson and Mrs. Sprinkle. Thank you for volunteering. And Mr. Renfro will join Mr. Black and Mr. Pena on the Budget Committee. I certainly appreciate everyone volunteering. Thank you. That takes us to agenda item number 5, which is an opportunity for anyone to comment on items that are not on today's agenda. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Hi, Amy Abels.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Yes, I am Amy Abels, Executive Director for the Foundation Appraisers Coalition of Texas, otherwise known as FACT. I usually speak in front of groups of about 300 people, and I love public speaking until I get in front of this dais. I think that's because I have an utmost respect for the time and effort that y'all put into the appraisal industry for Texas. I know it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of your free time and away from your work and everything. So we very much appreciate, and I appreciate it. And so I think that's why I get humbled when I get up here. We wanted to take this time on behalf of FACT to welcome Sarah Oates as the new chair for the board. Very excited about that. We're very proud of her. So she's been involved in FACT for a while. I also want to welcome the new board members. You'll have a good time, I promise you. It'll be some work, but you'll have a good time. We also want to thank Jamie for all the years that she's been up here and has worked with FACT, and I know you put in a lot of effort and time, so we really appreciate her and the retiring board members as well. We look forward to the ongoing future relationship between FACT and the board. We know we've been working together for a long time, and we know that we're going to continue to work forever. So there's some things we're going to work on, as we always do. It's great collaboration. And finally, Doug, I'm happy that you're actually retiring. I was worried that you might not ever retire. Not because we don't want you, but because you need to take a break and everything. So good luck in your next endeavors, and I'm sure I'll see you around because I'll run into you occasionally out in the world. So anyway, y'all have a good meeting, and well, I'm going to sit back down and watch for a while.
Thank you, Amy. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on any items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 6, which is the ratification of the official record of the September 6, 2019 board meeting as approved for posting on the website by the Secretary of the Board. Are there any changes?
Madam Chair, I move that we ratify the record for the September 6th board meeting.
I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mrs. Reed Lynch. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Agenda item number 7 is the final orders and surrenders. I will ask the board to look at the agenda item number 7, enforcement matters 7A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J. Is there any request for public comment on any of these? And there is no action required from the board on this, correct? Any discussion? Hearing none, we will move on to agenda item number 8. And I believe there's no action by the board on this item as well. Kristen?
Madam Chair and board members, Kristen Warman, your general counsel, and that is correct. There is no action needed on this agenda item at this time. I just wanted to let you know that the reason there is no action required is that the respondent requested an opportunity to address the board and was unavailable to attend today. So, as lawyers do under the rules of responsibility and disciplinary conduct and the Texas Lawyers Creed, our staff has agreed to a continuance in this matter, so this matter will come before you in February.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. So this is the part where we're going to leave the hanging Chad until lunchtime. So agenda item number 9 will remain outstanding until about 12:30. So we will move on to agenda item number 10, which is the report by the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee met via teleconference on October 15th, 2019. The first meeting since the September 6th, 2019 full board meeting. The committee members in attendance were me, Sarah Oates, Martha Gill, Reed Lynch, Vice Chair, and Chance Bolton, Secretary. Other board members in attendance were Jim Jeffries. The staff in attendance were Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner, and Kristen Warman, General Counsel. There were no others in attendance. The committee considered proposed amendments to TALC Rules 153.3, 153.9, and 157.50. No comments were received on the amendments as published in the Texas Register, and the committee recommends the board adopt the amendments as published. The committee also considered possible amendments to the TALC Rules 153.40 and 153.41 regarding education providers. The committee recommends the board publish the proposed amendments as presented for public comment. The committee also considered the Appraiser Qualifications Board's first exposure draft, Practical Applications of Real Estate Appraisal, PAREA, and the Appraisal Standards Board's concept paper on evaluations. The committee requested General Counsel to prepare draft comments for circulation and committee review before final submission to the AQB and the ASB on each of these items. The committee also discussed requesting an Attorney General opinion on the issue of evaluations and reviewed the letter from Governor Abbott dated October 8, 2019. The committee asked for General Counsel to prepare a request for opinion for consideration at a future meeting, and staff to prepare a response to the governor's letter for review at the November board meeting. The committee did not schedule a future meeting date. And that concludes the report of the executive committee. We will now hear the report by the AMC Advisory Committee by Mrs. Reed Lynch.
The AMC Advisory Committee report is, as of the date of our meeting, October 28th, 2019. Members in attendance: Martha Gale Reed, Chair, Committee Chair, David Mentasana, Lisa Rodriguez, and John Eichenberger. These were our two new members, Lisa and John. Since the September 6, 2019 TALC meeting, and the AMC Advisory Committee had met on October 28th via teleconference. Other members in attendance were Sarah Oates, TALC Chair, staff in attendance, Douglas Olmixon, Commissioner, Kristen Warman, General Counsel, Dionne Frederick, Recording Secretary, Troy Blue, Director, SES, Melissa Tran, SES Attorney, Sylvia Shoaker, Investigator, Pamela Carter, Licensing Manager, Becky Harmon, Licensing Specialist. Others in attendance were Joe Waller from FACT. The meeting was called to order at 10:02. The committee chair welcomed new members and started with committee member and staff introductions. The committee considered staff reports and reviewed the Appraisal Subcommittee, ASC, policy statements, which govern an oversight for the Appraisal Management Company program. The committee considered proposed amendments to TALC Rules 159.108 regarding AMC renewals and 159.204 related to complaint processing. No comments were received on the amendments as published by the Texas Register, and the committee recommends the board adopt the amendments as published. The committee reviewed the letter from Governor Abbott dated October 8, 2019, about removing barriers to licensure and reducing or eliminating unnecessary or burdensome requirements, and listened to staff proposals regarding an alternative mechanism for satisfying the statutory periodic review requirements. The committee asked staff to bring back draft language and criteria for the proposal for consideration at a future meeting. Committee members David Mentasana and Lisa Rodriguez volunteered to work on a checklist of suggested criteria and provide their suggestions to General Counsel. The meeting adjourned at 11:31, and the committee did not schedule a future meeting date. This concludes our report.
Thank you, Mrs. Reed Lynch. That takes us to agenda item number 12, which are the staff reports.
Madam Chair and members, good morning and welcome to your regular quarterly business meeting. I want to say a special word of welcome and congratulations, of course, to our new chair and our new public members. We look forward to your leadership and your participation in guiding this body. Thank you especially to all of you for yesterday's extensive workshop day. We both reviewed, discussed, and set expectations for the future. So under review, we had the annual orientation or reorientation, including significant training that is now required to be recertified annually, and that was a Herculean task to cover a significant amount of refresher training, if you will, and then of course having 3 new members who had not gone through any of that before. It took us a little longer than we probably would have liked, but it is our commitment, our staff commitment to you to always make sure that you're in compliance with all of the requirements, as well as familiar with all of the expectations and limitations. And so we stand at your service always in that regard. We had an in-depth discussion, far more detailed than we would normally have, about our enforcement processes, and that has been an ongoing, probably one of the most distinctive elements of the development of this board in the last decade, has been the transition from a style of enforcement that has become increasingly remedial focused and is reflected in the large percentage of complaints that we receive, where the ultimate disposition of that complaint is a dismissal after education. And so we look forward to your continuing input and guidance on whether we are on the right path or still have some areas in which we could grow in that direction. And then for next expectations, of course, we listened for your overall policy guidance. We had two things which will be on the agenda here today. Of course, our general strategic planning topics for fiscal 2020 or year 2020 processes, when this agency is responsible for developing the next 5-year strategic plan. So looking forward to your guidance as we go through that process. And much more immediate, a response to initiatives from the governor's office, requests for specific areas of emphasis that the governor, in his role as the leader of this great state, has asked every licensing agency to look very hard at removing unnecessary barriers to entry and maintenance of licenses, so the achievement and maintenance of licenses, so both pre-licensing requirements and ongoing licensing requirements, as well as the opportunities to recognize legitimate equivalent education and experience for those thousands and thousands of folks who come from other states to Texas all the time and want to continue in their professions here under this agency's and other agencies' regulatory requirements, to make sure that we are very appropriate in recognizing their current education and experience where equivalent, and setting reasonable expectations for that. Those, fortunately for all of us, are areas that we have looked at consistently, especially on the board side, because there is mandatory reciprocity at the national level. And so we've worked very hard to remove those kinds of barriers and recognize equivalent training and licensing. Since our last meeting in August, of course, we received the notice of the appointments and onboarded our new members. We attended the annual meeting in Washington, D.C. of the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials, at which probably the most important thing that happened there was that your general counsel was elected as the president for calendar 2020. And so I know Kristen, with the support of this board, will do an excellent job. And I gave my notice of retirement from serving on that board, but she'll be in the number one, both responsible seat and for leadership and all the responsibilities that come with that as well. That annual meeting always has reports from the Appraiser Qualifications Board, the Appraisal Standards Board, and the Appraisal Subcommittee. And so I know there's an agenda item talking about the accomplishments of that, and so I won't go into any further detail about that now. But I did want to say, as a part of the appraisal subcommittee update, just a heads up, that they will be coming to Texas for their biennial oversight visit in the last week of February, and I know we have moved our meetings to accommodate that. And I think you will enjoy working with them. The staff is always prepared under your guidance to provide them everything that they need. And we've had a very good working relationship with our federal oversight for many years. So, and I know they'll look forward to meeting the new board members as well. On today's agenda, of course, if all of the items are approved, we will substantially complete the implementation of all of the sunset directives. And that's a commitment that we made to you to make sure that we met all of those deadlines. And so we look forward to your action on those today. A couple of things also to look forward to in 2020 is the implementation of the Appraisal Management Company National Registry. And I just wanted to report to you that our team, in fact, day before yesterday, I sat with the team and reviewed a mock-up of the of what that process will look like, that online process. It's under current development. It's very close to being ready, and very happy to tell you that we don't believe that there'll be any difficulty in implementing that in early 2020 and meeting the requirement to get all of our Texas or AMCs registered and active in Texas up on the National Registry by June. Secondly, on behalf of all of or to the benefit of all of our stakeholders, especially the appraisers, we will be implementing, beginning in January, the FBI wrap-back process. And that is an automated notification from FBI and DPS if there's any addition to someone's criminal history record. Then we will just get a notification of that. Instead of replacing the process that we have today, which costs every license holder at renewal $28.25, those charges will go away forever. Okay? And then we resubmit and then look to see if in fact anything has been added in the last 2 years since the last time we checked. Well, this is an automated notice process. We've worked very hard to ensure that that process will work flawlessly to the benefit of both our all of our stakeholders and reducing work for the staff. So that's a win-win all around. That is one of the last pieces in a long chain of improvements, of which I know there will be many, many more in the future, but that I will have been a part of. And so let's just see. If there is... also today there'll be nominations for for leaders, and of course new committee appointments as well. So we look forward to the future direction that you will provide to the agency, and if we don't get an opportunity to communicate with you before then, on behalf of your staff, we wish you all a wonderful holiday season. Thank you. And if there's any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to the staff for their routine reports.
Commissioner, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say on behalf of all the board members that we appreciate the implementation of all of the sunset requirements so quickly so that we can get past that and move on to the regular functions of this agency. And I know it's an ongoing process, of course, with the reporting, but to have the major bulk of the work already done, we certainly appreciate that.
Okay. You're welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Tony Slagle, I'm the Deputy Commissioner. I'm going to give a brief report on customer service issues. I sent out an update at the beginning of the month with some more detailed information, but I did want to just stress a couple of highlights. As of end of October, we have a full quarter of calls through the contact center in which our hold times are under 2 minutes, which is a huge improvement. In October, the contact center handled 10% more calls than they did in September, with I believe with even a lower hold time than they did in September, so that's good as well. Looking at the last couple of days, just for some insight, we received just over 1,700 calls. We ran the Expire program that usually generates additional calls, and even with that increased volume, we're hovering right around the 2-minute mark. So we're really got things moving in the right direction there. That's not my doing; it's Mr. Hood's doing. So he deserves all the thanks for that. I did want to mention there are 2 IT-related projects that are near completion that are going to help with customer service. The first is the app tracker on the website, which lets an individual applicant for an appraiser application go on our website and look and see where they are status-wise for their application. The second phase of that is rolling out hopefully by the end of the month, and what that will do is it will give a drill down in terms of where they are on the audit process. I know we showed you a snapshot of that yesterday, but that should hopefully be going live at the end of the month, so anyone who wants to know where they are in the audit process can click on that and they'll get a more drilled down detailed information about that. The second IT project that we're hoping to have completed by the end of the year is the document upload process. It's been a long time coming. We've been working very hard with 2 separate different entities trying to get that done, and what that will do is allow people as they apply to upload their documents at that time rather than having to email them to us, which does present some time lag in terms of the processing application. So this will be essentially a game changer in terms of how our staff is able to handle those documents, and hopefully significantly narrow the processing time on that. One final thing I did want to mention is something the Commissioner mentioned about the AMC National Registry fee. As of last week, I believe we sent out a notice to all of the primary contacts for AMCs, notifying them that our process would be going into place based on some rules that are before you today. Anticipating the implementation of those rules and the process, we scheduled a webinar for those AMCs to log in, and we'll walk them through the process and answer any questions. That webinar is scheduled for December 9th at 2 p.m. We've had so far just under 40 people have already registered for it, so it's fairly good. I think out of 170 plus AMCs, we hope to get everybody registered for it. But anyway, we will send out an additional reminder to those primary contacts that the webinar will be hosted, just so we can make sure that we answer any questions or address any issues they might have going forward. It's a fairly simple process. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, I'll sit down.
Tony, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the level of excitement that I see from you when you give us regular updates on the hold times. To have that excitement as you're tackling such a big problem certainly makes us feel more at ease that you're on it. So we appreciate that. And as you mentioned, we did see the board saw yesterday the application tracker and the audit tracker. And I think that that's a fantastic rollout, and I appreciate the effort that went into that, because I know that takes a lot of steps and it's a lot of IT, but it's going to significantly improve the process. So we certainly appreciate that as well.
Well, it's a joy to come up here and give you good news. So, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Robert Hood, Director of Reception and Communication Services Division. I would like to introduce some of the newest representatives to the RCS team. We have Shamira McFarland, please stand, Mandy Garrick, and Sarah Connolly. Together, these new representatives bring over 20 years of customer service experience. Since their start date of September 1st, they have each contributed to our email volume and also answering on average, about 30 calls per day. Their personalities, their professionalism, and their eagerness to give good customer service makes them a great fit to the RCS team. Please help me welcome these three to our team. The RCS stats and the progress of the division were provided in your materials as well as in the executive summary. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Hood.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Steve Rapp, Director of IT. I have nothing further to add to my report. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. If not, I'm excited to announce a promotion and 3 new additions to our staff as well. Seeing no questions, if you'll please stand. First, Denicia Jackson. Denicia Jackson. Yeah. We're making you guess which one's Denicia back there. Denicia has been with the agency since July of 2012. She came in the file room imaging room, and then about 2 years ago expressed some interest in helping us out in the help desk area. So we began some training there. So when we had a long-term employee retire, the transition was quite easy to move her into the help desk, and she has excelled in that spot since then. Thank you, Denicia. Please join me in welcoming Denicia. Ms. Beverly Archer. Moving out of the file room and into the imaging room. Can you see? Created a vacancy there. We had the luxury of Beverly temp for us a couple of years ago. So when that vacancy opened, it became an easy decision to move Beverly into the spot that Denicia once filled. Beverly comes to us with quite a bit of service. She spent 20 years at Travis County, where she was the criminal supervisor for the criminal division of Precinct 2, which she says is the largest precinct in Travis County. And so we thought that that would make an excellent fit in the IT division. So please welcome, please help me in welcoming Beverly Archer. Tony Chirian. Tony came into a new role. As the agency grew, we added another support position. He's on the front lines with Denicia, helping to support these fine folks and these fine folks sitting here as well. Tony comes to us with extensive IT experience, which comes from the public and private sector. His state service includes the Texas State Library, the Dental Board, the Health Professions Council, the Bullock Museum, Parks and Wildlife, UT Austin, and Texas State University. Please help me. Please join me in welcoming Tony to the team. And last but not least, Tom Perdue. Tom filled also a new position as we grew. As you may know, versus our licensing system, Tom comes to us with almost 20 years of experience in working in the Versa system. He did that at the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. He actually worked for Versa for a year and a half and did a couple of implementations with them from the vendor side. And then he most recently spent 3 years at TDLR, moving 13 programs over from the Department of State Health Services that were on the Versa system. So please join me in welcoming Tom Perdue. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Troy Bollier, Director of Standards and Enforcement Services. I wanted to just briefly bring to your attention one typographical error. If you turn to page 122 in your materials, you'll see there's some information about the experience audits. And I wanted to draw your attention to the large white box and the very bottom bullet. That is information in regards to the contract reviewers that we've been using and making great strides in improving the turn time. And I just wanted you to be aware that average resolution time of 41 days for the contractors is a typographical error. It's actually 27 days. And I say that because I want you to know that obviously the contract we have with those individuals is on a 30-day turn time, and we work very diligently to make sure they maintain that. So I just wanted to point that out to you. If you have any other questions or concerns, I'm happy to address them, though.
Tony, I would just like to ask Troy what the impact has been on the hiring contractors.
Yes, ma'am. It significantly has, and I really appreciate that this board has been able to find those resources. As I mentioned yesterday in the workshop, I believe we're on the cusp of turning the tide and reaching that 30 to 60 day goal that the board has set, particularly in the commercial audit arena, which I know we have a backlog on. All 13 contractors have been hired and are actively working on cases. And as soon as the audit that they currently have is completed, we'll only have 4 left that are beyond that 30 to 60 day time frame. And so once those 4 are completed, the next oldest is only 24 days old. So I'm very comfortable that in the coming months we're going to be timely and swiftly getting through these audits.
Super.
Troy, so just make sure we all have a picture here. So on pages 120 and 121, we see average processing times in the graphs, and for commercial, we're seeing an average of 218 to 19 over the last fiscal year and starting this year.
Yes, sir.
And then in the next graph, we see 200 in for standard, 207 days. So can you maybe explain what each one of these is and why they differ? And then my next question is, what do you anticipate we look like at the next meeting?
Yes, sir. So you're exactly right. So 120 in the upper right-hand quadrant, you have a bar graph there, and what that reflects is the average processing time, residential and commercial broken out. As you know, though, audits come in all different types. And so if you look at this page 121, that's actually kind of a deeper dive, if you will, a slicing and dicing of that average time based on the different categories of audits. So for example, if something goes through the audit process and there's absolutely no problems or issues, it's much quicker and easier to resolve, as opposed to one that either might have problems and ultimately be a denial, or might be one that goes through our contingent approval process where somebody gets some remedial training and then is able to move forward. So this is actually a breakout of what those average turn times are based on those categorizations. But to answer your main question, what are things going to look like going forward? I would say 2 things. One is that keep in mind these numbers are reflective of that backlog. So they're not acceptable numbers at all, and they're reflective of working through that backlog. So every time that we resolve an old case that's very old, it drags that average down so that the number, is 7, 8, 9 months old. So once we do get through that backlog, like I said, we're on the cusp of that, I would expect going forward that we'd be meeting our goal of a 30 to 60 day turn time, so that in the near future, you'll see an average turn time somewhere between 30 and 60 days. Obviously, we're going to have to get those old backlog cases out of the system, if you will, so they're not influencing the average. But say next year, when we have no impact from those old numbers, I think it'll be excellent.
Okay, so the backlog cases that we have, what's being done specifically to try to move? I mean, are those with the commercial auditors now?
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. Like I said earlier, they have every one of those 13 has one. And after that, there's only 4 more in that backlog. And then, like I said, the 5th one is only 24 days old.
So we should see something dramatically different in our report in February, say?
Well, keep in mind, these are averages, though.
I understand.
Based on the fiscal year. So in February, you're still going to, these averages are going to be influenced by the backlog that we just cleared. So I think you will start to see improvement, but just keep in mind that the progress we've made is on the old ones is still going to be influencing that number.
I understand. Well, maybe we can in the next meeting, we can talk about those specific numbers of where we are and the disposition of the backlog cases versus the current cases, so that what I want to do is I want the stakeholders and the public to understand that we've made some progress with this new initiative.
And I'm happy to be prepared to discuss that so you have an understanding of before and the present.
Great. Thank you, sir.
And maybe, Troy, the way that we do that, because these first few from fiscal year 20 are dragging the average, maybe we do it by month, because I like to show when I have good work. And so if it continues on that path, let's not let those first few drag us down and not give us the real picture of what's going forward.
Happy to do that.
I have one other question. So once a trainee applies, what would be a typical time for them to reach licensure? Okay, once their education has been turned in, from that point on, what could be assumed?
That's a very challenging question, and I don't want to give misleading information. As we talked about yesterday, Licensing and Registration Services has just developed their own report that attempts to track how much time it takes on the staff side versus how much time it's pending with the applicant requesting additional materials. And so that's a very new report that's being tweaked and rolled out. And so you have to take that in conjunction with these audit times, as well as the impact of the background check process too. So it's difficult for me to say exactly what that total would be. The application remains open for an entire year by law, and the goal, both my team and I know Denise with the licensing team, is to continually move things through as fast as possible. There may be delays, but we want to minimize the delays that are engendered because of the staff processing.
So you mentioned that, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
apologize.
So could I have like a window? Just so, because I get calls asking me, you know, what to expect. And so assuming that there are no huge obstacles, what could be a likely window for an applicant?
You know, I don't know if Denise perhaps has better information on that. Whether she knows of an average, I don't know.
Hi, Denise Sample, Director of Licensing and Registration Services. Those are the figures that we're still trying to capture and exclude any time where we've requested additional information from an applicant, because they could take, you know, as much time as they need to get that information back to us. What we're trying to capture in licensing is how long from when we receive documents or an application it takes us to provide a response to the applicant, whether that's we need additional information, we need additional education, or you are now cleared to take the exam. And so, you know, anecdotally, we strive to get things off of our plate within about 10 business days, or, you know, 14 calendar days, but that's the purpose of that report, is to narrow that down and get that data for you. And so that's what we're still working on.
And when can we expect ballpark when that report will be available, or that data will be consistently generated?
We are hoping, this is a report and a figure that has been requested by Sunset, and so that we do have a deadline for preparing that report. It's a matter, I'd say probably in a few months. Tony, does that sound? It's due January 1st, so definitely prior.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
By then we should, we're trying to just make sure we're capturing everything correctly, because of the fact that applications are open for a year. You know, trying to narrow down, do we show you where we are in each month? Is it a cumulative? These are all the the data elements we're trying to determine gets us the best picture or representation of how long it takes us to process an application.
Thank you.
So then, the second part of that is, as Troy touched on, is what his staff is in charge of, the audit and the criminal history background check.
If you'll remind me, because it's been a long time since I went through the process, what is so you submit an application for licensure. At that time, you're supposed to submit your education with that application?
Sometimes education is included with it. Sometimes it's all of the required.
It's supposed to be included?
It could be. Part of our evaluation process is to give you an official notice of what's required, what's lacking. So there are not a lot of applicants that come in with no education included, so most of them include something, but that's part of our process.
That's right, because then they have to see if that education meets all the requirements, because some of it comes from university experience, and that's, okay.
Right, we're reviewing a transcript or a course completion document.
Okay.
So that's
and then
part
the
of
next
review.
step is the audit or the exam?
We review the education and experience, and if they've met those requirements, at that point we can issue authorization to sit for the exam and forward it over to Troy's team for the audit, so that they can be scheduling the exam and preparing for that, getting the fingerprint process taken care of while waiting for the audit process to be complete.
Okay, so there is a lot of time for the applicant, a lot of responsibility that once you get it and you have to go back to them, they could significantly delay the getting education or getting back to you.
Yeah, and they know that they have the year to meet all the requirements in order to get licensed on that application.
But the year includes the experience audit.
Yes. So if somebody's application is about to expire after a year and it's still with us in audit, we're not going to terminate that application, obviously, because that's a delay on our part.
Okay. Thank you.
So a year could be a good answer.
Well, sorry about that. What we're of course trying to capture and just report it. We just did report the rudimentary analysis that we did, where we've automated the process of how long does it take us from the time we receive information to either approve it or notify the applicant that the ball is back in their court. We need more information, or you have the next step, or whatever. But those days, on average, this is across all application types, so it's a lot shorter for trainees than it is for certified general upgrade, all right? Was 12 and a half days. 12 and a half days that it's sitting with us, okay? Now, so all of that other time, if we just looked at average from the day we received the first application until they actually receive their license, are time waiting for other things to happen. Now, what we're doing with the application tracker and then increasing that to include the audit process is adding in the average time for audits. Right now, that 12 and a half days is not inclusive of audit time today, but it will be by January the 1st.
Would it be possible for y'all to pull an application that was the fastest in the last 12 months so that we could know sort of what the minimum is, the best is?
No.
We can look into pulling that information for you. Would you, the average that Doug alluded to includes all of them, including the temporary non-resident appraisers?
Well, I'm thinking if we're getting phone calls and we can say, if you're ready with your education and the moment that you get the go ahead to take the exam and you submit your experience audit on time, here's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
So you're talking about excluding out-of-state temporary registrations, excluding trainees. So it's really the license and then the certified. So between those three license types, because those are the ones that have all the various elements, including exams. The others don't.
When someone calls us, it's usually a trainee trying to get their license. And it's, they're concerned because that affects everything they're doing. And so they're asking us, and that it's been in the pool so long. And I know things are coming up, and that's why I'm asking for the shortest time, and a lot of it's their responsibility, which we can tell them that as well, but at least we could say best case scenario, you'll have that and you'll be able to say you're a licensed appraiser in X.
I do think it's a great idea to perhaps pull some sample cases for the board to review of your success stories so that we can see in those cases what made those successful closures, and we can then direct the calls to say, just what you suggested. But to be able to look at that would be helpful to see, okay, if you have an application that looks like this, you have a greater chance of getting it closed quicker.
Yeah, that's information that I think we should be able to pull and possibly even separate by those different application types if those are the calls that you're getting.
And then is there a way, if we're saying that a lot of the delays are on the applicant side where we're waiting for information from them, is there a way that we can assist them better with sending more reminders or reaching out to them more frequently as opposed to just saying, hey, the ball's in your court, we'll just wait on you to come back? But is there a way that we can help them to be more successful in getting that information in?
Well, with as we get the data and are able to analyze that a little better, that's our vision going forward, is to be able to be more proactive and say, Mr. John Doe, you applied for this application and you haven't sent us anything. Do you still intend to pursue this? That's where we'd like to be, and be able to capture how long it takes an applicant to get back to us with information that we've requested. We just don't have that data yet.
Okay.
But the application tracker should assist in that, so that John Doe can go on
visual
and
presentation
know, oh, the ball is in my court, and they can track it for themselves.
One of the big benefits of that is so that people can go onto the app tracker and see, oh, it says requested data? Oh, well, okay, I didn't know that. And they can reach out and actually have a call where they say, hey, it shows that you're requesting info. What do you need from us? Rather than where are you on my app? So it focuses those calls as well.
And Madam Chair and board members, I just wanted to let y'all know that this is one of the items that the board has delegated to the Enforcement Committee to take a hard look at, and they have been taking that hard look. At our last committee meeting, we had a flow chart that detailed all of the various steps in our application process, and we can certainly provide that to all of the board members so that y'all get a clearer picture of all of the various steps that an application has to go through. And in addition, when the Enforcement Committee looked at experience audits in particular and wanted to know how long is it taking from the time we request the work files that we are going to audit to the applicant actually sending in those work files. I mean, we had response times that varied anywhere from 7 days from the date we requested them to almost 6 months that it took for an applicant to get those files back to us. And, it was surprising the number of applicants who waited more than 60 days to send those files in. Now, obviously, we know there's some applicants that work in large firms, and they're trying to, pull their work files together because pieces may be in other files, just depending on the work that they're doing. But we would like to see them get those files back to us more quickly. Right now, the statute does allow them 60 days to get that to us. If we wanted to encourage them to get them to us quicker, we could look into making a statutory change. Or we could also look into increasing the number of reminders. But in reality, if they are seeking that license, and I would think that they would want to send them to us as fast as they possibly could so that we could do that work and then they could turn around and get their license.
You'd think.
And one success story we do have from last year that I want to remind the board members and the new members in particular. Last year in February, we transitioned to an all-electronic audit notice and work file submission process. So now, rather than I need to package up a giant box of commercial files and mail them or send in a flash drive and go to the post office, it's here's a notice by email with a OneDrive link. Please send us back the files. So those turn times as a result of that in many instances have improved, where it's simply, okay, here's my response, the files have been uploaded. So that's been one positive.
Thank you.
Troy, I do have one other question for you. On page 118, there is, under the Dodd-Frank and other, it says no longer used as of February 2020.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you just tell me what that?
We rearranged as part of the sunset process when we were redoing these reports that the board approved back in February. We rearranged some of the categories, and so this was simply a category that fell off. It was no longer in use. That's all that means.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Good morning, Priscilla Pifo, Director of Staff and Support Services. Good to see you all again. I have one staff member that I'm going to introduce, then I'm going to report to you on the Public Funds Investment Act requirements, and then I'll answer any questions you might have on reports. But first, I would like to introduce Ron Hunter. Very pleased to have Ron joining our team. Ron comes to us with 26 years of experience in governmental accounting. He is certified as a purchaser, and he has done contract work, project management, and we've hired him to help us, and I think I mentioned this yesterday. We are transitioning throughout the next year into the comprehensive financial system that the state of Texas uses. It will take us a year to implement, and Ron has come on board to help us implement that. He excels in process improvement. He has great management and leadership experience, and I'd like to welcome Ron to the team. Did I mention he's a great guy? I'd like to update you on the Public Funds Investment Act. Every 2 years, we're required to ensure that all staff members have been trained. We are audited on the public funds investment, and we will, I'm not sure if do they have that in there for, no. Okay, so I'm just going to read to you what I've got. The Public Funds Investment Act requires that all officers are trained, and that includes all board members. And so y'all will have gotten that for the new board members in your materials, and when you do that, you'll print that out and we'll put that in your file. All the other board members, you've done it once, you don't have to do it again. Staff has to do it every 2 years, and that's how we get to put our signatures at the bottom of the investment funds that you have there. We're required by law to report this to you, that all the training has been up to date once we get your certificates, and that we are compliant with the law. Beyond that, if you have any questions on the reports that I've prepared, I'm happy to answer them. And I have staff here as well from our budget analyst.
Priscilla, as I promised you yesterday,
yes.
I am going to ask about fiscal year 19, that our expenditures, what we budgeted for, we came in much lower than that.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to ask you about.
Absolutely. And so you'll notice in the materials in front of you, and I assume that is on page 111.
111. Mm-hmm.
So that is what we're calling the true-up or the reconciled end-of-year budget. And it just shows 1 year as opposed to the one that I showed you yesterday had the 5 years. And there's a middle column that says balance. And at the bottom of that for expenditures, it's a little bit less, the $284,000 or $290,794. It's under the balance column in the total expenditures column. That's the total amount. That's a little bit less that's there than it was on the one you saw yesterday, and that's because of the year-end things that had come in. So when we total it up, as you look up and down that column, you can see where we've left money on the table. I'm going to start at the top, and there's $72,000 unexpended in salaries, and that's because when we added staff during the course of the year, and that's when we amended the budget, we didn't get all those positions hired right away, so that's going to be part of that. And then associated personnel costs, it's about $69,000 there. And the other significant amounts professional services. And there's some that offset one another, and I won't go into great detail with this unless you would like me to. I could go down every line. But the other significant one is exactly what y'all were talking to Troy about, the contracted work that's being done for the expenditure audits. As we worked through the year and we expended that money, as the work was getting done, that money was coming out. The money that's left, we spent about $56,000 on the experience audits, and the money that's left in there is about $76,000 of the $81,864 for professional fees and services, and that's again about 5 lines down from the top. So that really is the bulk, I would say. Other questions?
Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you so much.
Hello again, Madam Chair and board members. For those of you who pay attention to what happens on the federal level, the AQB, the Appraiser Qualifications Board, met on November 1st of this year, and they adopted some new criteria for supervisory appraisers that will take effect on January 1st, 2020. So before you in agenda item 13 is an emergency adoption of amendments to TALCB Rule 153.21 regarding appraiser trainees and supervisory appraisers. And this amendment would implement those changes adopted by the AQB with an effective date of January 1st of 2020. Thus, staff recommends that the board authorize staff to submit for emergency adoption amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code Section 153.21 as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption to be effective on January 1st of 2020.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendation as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Black and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Madam Chair, if I might, just as a moment of personal privilege, point out that this particular item is actually not just the fact that it is an emergency adoption, but the subject matter itself actually came from our general counsel and staff raising this issue with the AQB. And then when they proposed the correction or the fix that we had recommended, they made another error and left out something else, and then we caught that too as well. Kristen did, and they immediately withdrew it and reproposed it. So this entire area of fix comes from your staff paying very close attention to all of the federal oversight regulatory stuff that happens. I just thought it'd be important for you to know that.
That does not surprise me. And Kristen, while we're on it, because I had this question earlier, if you'll go ahead and address the fact that this item is, we're seeing that again in the agenda under 17A.
Yes, we will be seeing this item again under 17A. Essentially, what happens when we have to implement a change to our rules with a specific effective date based on a change in the law, be it state law or federal law, then we adopt those rules as an emergency amendment so that we can implement those changes as required. We also propose amendments, the exact same amendments, through the normal notice and comment rulemaking process. And agenda item 17A is the proposal of these same amendments. They will be published in the Texas Register so that we can then receive any public comments on those proposed amendments, and they will come back to you again at a future meeting for adoption.
Everybody understand that?
Good to know.
Very good. Thank you, Kristen. Oh, did we vote? Moving on to 14. Okay. Nope, we did. We're on to 14. Okay. Very good. Agenda item 14.
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, before you in agenda item 14 are amendments to several rules in Chapter 153 of the Texas Administrative Code. The rules before you for amendment or adoption of amendments are Rule 153.3, which implements the Sunset Directive about having the board develop a policy for allowing public comments at regular board meetings like the one we're having today. This is a practice that the board had always followed, and we've allowed the members of the public to come and comment on both agenda items and non-agenda items. So these amendments simply state that policy in the board's rules. The amendments to section 153.5 fees are also before you. Again, this is part of the implementation of the sunset directives from the Sunset Commission and the legislature to streamline our fees, and then also to improve customer service and reduce our complaint resolution timeframes, and provide straightforward fee setting for license holders. So these fees implement the fiscal year 2020 budget that was adopted at the board meeting in September and help to fund those additional positions that you heard Troy speak about earlier to help reduce our complaint resolution timeframes. The next item up for amendment or up for adoption is amendments to Section 153.9 applications. These amendments provide clarity to the applicants regarding our license requirements for military service members. They implement statutory changes enacted by the legislature in Senate Bill 1200 earlier this year, which established limited reciprocity for military spouses to practice in Texas, that are consistent with the license reciprocity that is already available under federal law and included in the board's rules and our statute. The next section up for adoption is 153.17, license renewal. The amendments to this provision implement statutory changes to the occupations code that were enacted as part of our sunset review process and allow the board to deny a license renewal if a license holder is in violation of a board order. That is a standard option available to most licensing agencies across the state, and the Sunset Commission saw fit to recommend that this board have that option available to it if needed. And this rule would implement that legislative change. The amendments to section 153.19 are next up in this agenda item. These amendments relate to requirements that were enacted by the legislature regarding how the board evaluates criminal convictions and arrests of license applicants and license holders when we are deciding whether to grant an applicant a license or to renew a license of one of our existing license holders. These amendments were adopted on an emergency basis back in September, so this is the adoption through the normal notice and comment rulemaking process, and they implement legislative changes that were enacted in House Bill 1342 and Senate Bill 1217. Then finally, in this agenda item are amendments to Section 153.24, our complaint processing rule. These amendments implement statutory changes that were enacted as part of our sunset review process. They will require the board to protect a complainant's identity to the extent possible by excluding that identifying information when sending a complaint notice to the respondent. They also require the board to send periodic written notice of the status of a complaint to the complainant and each respondent until the complaint is finally resolved, and they authorize the board to order refunds to consumers of appraisal services in certain limited circumstances. The proposed amendments also correct a couple of typographical errors in this section. We did not receive any comments on the amendments as they were proposed, aside from those comments that were considered by the board at the September meeting when the rules were proposed. Staff is recommending that the board authorize staff to submit for adoption amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code sections 153.3, 153.9, 153.17, 153.19, and 153.24 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption. Staff is also recommending that the board authorize staff to submit for adoption amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code 153.5 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption to become effective on January 1st of 2020.
Any questions for Kristen?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
I move the board approve staff's recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Black. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. On to agenda item number 16. 15. 15.
Madam Chair and board members, before you in agenda item 15 is the discussion and possible action to adopt a new rule, section 157.150 of Title 22 of the Texas Administrative Code related to negotiated rulemaking. This new rule implements legislative changes that were enacted as part of our sunset review process that requires the board to develop a policy encouraging the use of negotiated rulemaking. The new rule sets forth the board's policy for negotiated rulemaking. No comments were received on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends the board authorize staff to submit for adoption new 22 Texas Administrative Code section 157.50 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Any questions for Kristen?
Madam Chair, I move that the board accept the staff's recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now we are on to agenda item number 16.
Agenda item 16 includes several amendments up for adoption to Chapter 159 of the Texas Administrative Code related to appraisal management companies. The first provision up for adoption is Section 159.52, fees. These amendments would eliminate certain fees to license holders to implement the changes enacted by the legislature as part of our sunset review and management directives from the Sunset Advisory Commission to limit fund growth and provide straightforward fee setting for license holders. The amendments also implement a fee for untimely payment of AMC National Registry fees to support collection and enforcement of the AMC National Registry fees as required under federal law, and conform the language in this section regarding deposit of the AMC registry fees to the language in Chapter 1104 of the Occupations Code. The amendments also clarify the consequences for providing a dishonored form of payment. Also up for adoption are amendments to Section 159.108, which would implement statutory changes enacted as part of our sunset review process, again allowing the board to deny a license renewal if a license holder is in violation of a board order. The amendments would also reorganize this section to provide greater clarity to members of the public and license holders. Also up for adoption are is a brand new Section 159.110 to implement the collection process and enforcement of AMC National Registry fees, as you heard earlier from Tony Slagle. We have begun the communication process, and this is just the adoption of a rule that spells out how we will implement the process and provide clarity to members of the public and license holders about the requirements for collecting these fees. Then last but not least, amendments to Section 159.204 would require the board to protect a complainant's identity to the extent possible by excluding identifying information when sending complaint notices to respondents. Would also require the board to send periodic written notice of the status of a complaint to the complainant and respondent until the resolution of that complaint, and authorize the board to order refunds to consumers of appraisal services in certain limited circumstances. These amendments are also the result of statutory changes that were enacted as part of our sunset review process. We have received no comments on any of the proposed amendments or the new rule as that was proposed. So staff recommends that the board authorize staff to submit for adoption amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code sections 159.108 and 159.204 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption. Staff also recommends that the board authorize staff to submit for adoption amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code sections 159.52 and new section 159.110 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption, to be effective January 1st, 2020.
Does anybody have any questions for Kristen?
Madam Chair, I move the board approve staff's recommendations.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Black. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now we are on to agenda item number 17A, which is similar to agenda item number 13, as we noted earlier.
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, agenda item 17A is the proposal of amendments to Board Rule 153.21 regarding appraiser trainees and supervisory appraisers. As we heard earlier, these amendments would implement changes adopted by the Appraiser Qualifications Board, or the AQB, on November 1st of 2019, which take effect on January 1st of 2020. Under these new criteria, a certified appraiser must be in good standing and not have had within the last 3 years a certified appraiser credential canceled, surrendered in lieu of discipline, suspended, or revoked in any state for a substantive cause related to appraisal practice in order to be eligible to serve as a supervisory appraiser. The staff recommends that the board authorize staff to submit amendments to Section 153.21 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
I move that the board approve staff's recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Bolton. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. (17B).
Madam Chair and board members, before you in 17B are proposed amendments to Section 153.40, approval of continuing education providers and courses. The Executive Committee considered these proposed amendments and is recommending the amendments to implement changes adopted by the legislature in Senate Bill 624 as part of our sunset review process, allowing the board to deny a renewal application if a continuing education provider is in violation of a board order. The committee also recommends proposing amendments to allow continuing education providers to reschedule certain continuing education courses if a course is canceled due to circumstances beyond the provider's control, including severe weather or instructor illness. Under the proposed amendments, a provider would be permitted to reschedule a course without incurring additional fees by providing notice of the new course date to the board and offering the course in the same manner originally approved by the board. To remove barriers and to provide greater clarity, the Executive Committee also recommends amendments that would allow a unit of federal, state, or local government to offer continuing education courses without becoming an approved education provider, and substitute the term renewal for the phrase subsequent approval. Staff is recommending that the board authorize staff to submit amendments to Section 153.40 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that the board approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. Jeffries. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. On to 17C.
Madam Chair and board members, before you in Agenda Item 17C are proposed amendments to Section 153.41, ACE Providers, Compliance and Enforcement. The Executive Committee considered these proposed amendments and recommends the proposed amendments to provide more information to education providers and members of the public regarding the process for auditing continuing education providers and courses and the or the processes for handling complaints when deficiencies are identified during an audit. Under the proposed amendments, providers will receive a copy of the audit report and be given a reasonable opportunity to cure any deficiencies identified during an audit. The proposed amendments also clarify when an audit report may be treated as a complaint and referred for enforcement. The amendments also define a reasonable opportunity to cure and allow providers to request an extension of time to cure a deficiency if certain criteria are met. Staff recommends that the board authorize staff to submit amendments to Section 153.41 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Madam Chair, move that the board approve staff's recommendation.
A second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Ms. Robinson. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Kristen, looking at the agenda, the next few agenda items as we move on to pending business, I believe we can tackle 18 and 19. Number 20, we should wait till after executive session about the Attorney General's letter. So we will tackle 18 and 19 now and see where that puts us.
So agenda item 18A is report on comments submitted to the Appraisal Standards Board regarding the ASB concept paper on evaluations. The Appraiser Appraisal Standards Board, there we go, issued a concept paper regarding the question of whether to include evaluation standards in USPAP, or the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. The concept, or in response to this concept paper, the board submitted the comments before you in the materials on October 18th, and they were considered by the Appraisal Standards Board at its meeting earlier last month in October in conjunction with the Aero Conference. We await a response from the ASB, and we look forward to seeing what they have to say. In agenda item 18B are comments submitted on behalf of the board to the AQB, the Appraiser Qualifications Board, regarding 2 exposure drafts. We've already heard about the second exposure draft, supervisory appraiser requirements, as we went through the proposed amendments and emergency amendments to the board's rules, and those were adopted. The comments submitted by the board supported the adoption of those AQB changes, and we have now implemented rules to implement the changes adopted by the AQB. The other comments in agenda item 18B were comments submitted on the first exposure draft for the practical applications of real estate appraisal, or PAREA. PAREA is essentially a virtual experience course whereby appraiser trainees could gain experience through a virtual classroom, and the exposure draft submits the AQB's idea of what topics would be covered in this training course and gives state regulators an explanation of the subject matter of those topics and the preliminary design of this training course. The board submitted comments related to this, and those are in the materials, and we anticipate that the AQB will take all of the comments into consideration and come back with a second exposure draft to provide more details in what will be included in the Perea course offerings. Are there any questions on any of those comments that the board submitted?
Hearing none, we can move on to agenda item number 19, which is the report on the 2019 Fall Conference of the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials, which was attended by myself, Commissioner Oldmixon, Kristen Warman, and Troy. Somebody remind me how to say his last name.
Bollier.
Bollier. Oh, that's easy. It's easier than the way it reads. Okay. And that was the Texas contingent. I'm not missing anyone, correct?
Yes.
I have comments. Commissioner, will you also be speaking to your time at the Arrow? And you as well, Kristen?
Yes, I have a few comments.
Okay, go. I'll let you go first.
As the chair has referenced, we had a contingent of staff and one of the board members attend the Arrow Conference in October. This was the fall conference of the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials. We get to hear from state regulators across the U.S. on practices that are working in their states. We also get to hear from the ASB and the AQB and the ASC, all of those alphabet soup of our federal oversight regulators. As the commissioner mentioned, we will have a visit from the appraisal subcommittee, the ASC. They will be coming in February. Before their arrival, they will send us lists of all of the files that they want us to pull so they can look at and examine when they review our appraiser program. They will also look at our AMC statutes and rules in anticipation of completing the first AMC review in 2 years. That will occur in 2022. And so we anticipate their arrival, and we look forward to showing them how well we have complied with our obligations under federal law, as we have done since I arrived in 2014 into this position. In addition, the other thing I wanted to report to you about the Arrow Conference is the spring conference will be held in 2020 here in San Antonio, just down the road. So I would hope that we could make every effort to support the conference and send a larger contingent of both board members and staff to that conference so that all of you can experience that interaction that we have on a regular basis, and then you can get a better picture as to how Texas compares to the other states that regulate appraisers. And I think maybe both the vice chair and the chair can speak to that issue, because I know they have both attended Arrow conferences in the past. And you know, I think that we stand up very well, and even head and shoulders above some of our regulatory comparators. And that's all I have to say. And
yes, I did think that the conference was highly valuable to me as a board member, and certainly as part of my onboarding process. That coinciding was very lucky for me. It helped me both understand sort of the layers of regulation and to see it firsthand, although I've taken USPAP so many times over my career and have answered questions on this, to actually be there and understand who the ASC, the AQB, how all of those things, work together and what their different functions are was certainly helpful for me. Also to understand the issues that are, to hear the conversations about the issues that are currently dominating our industry was extremely helpful. Meeting all of the other people that do what we do in other states was very helpful. I felt like it was so helpful and impactful for me as a board member that I certainly would like for us to try to see if there's a way that we can maybe change our policy so that we can include more people when it is in a faraway place so that more board members can go. Certainly maybe stagger or on some sort of rotating basis, but I definitely think it's beneficial it would be beneficial to all of us, both the appraiser members and the public members, to attend. The very first morning, there was the meeting, like Kristen said, about the ASB's public meeting on evaluations. The first 4 panelists were members of the banking industry, so the American Bankers Association, Bank of America, and 2 other large banks. And I thought it was interesting that, for the most part, their comment was that they didn't think that the ASB had the statutory authority to do anything on evaluations. And so I thought, well, if that question hasn't even, that basic foundational question hasn't even been answered, it certainly helps us to know that we can't probably sit around and wait for them to do something about it. Another set of panelists were from other states that had taken some action on evaluations or had planned to take some action. What I did note was interesting was that Alabama said we are going to make a change statutorily, and in the meantime, we are going to take a hands-off approach to this. And I just thought that was an interesting way to attack the problem, to know that it was a problem and that they were doing something about it, but that they were kind of sending a public message about, where they were going with it. We attended various breakout sessions that were about the AMC registry fees, and there's a whole lot of money going to the ASC through these registry fees, and that was a topic of conversation throughout the entire conference, and what they were going to do with that money. They plan on granting the money back to the states under various conditions and going to try and do it equitably. One thing that I didn't know before I went there was that the chair of the AQB is a Texas appraiser, Mark Lewis, and so certainly after hearing him talk about Perea, I was much more comfortable with the idea. I know that this board and in committees we've talked about Perea and we've had some questions and some concerns, and certainly after hearing Mark speak about it, I felt more comfortable that they're looking at all of the issues and they have all of the questions that we have had. They're certainly considering them, and they have a plan of attack, it seems like to me. And he said that he would be a reference and would come to and speak to us as a board if we ever needed him to come and talk further about Perea, so that we as a board can lend our support as we write letters to the different exposure drafts so that we can better understand it. The last breakout session that I attended was with other board members from across the country, which was very interesting to hear how other boards, some of the board members had been serving for over 20 years, and I think I was the newbie at 2 or 3 weeks at that point. But it was that was really interesting, and they had a representative from the ASC in the room to help answer questions. And the one thing I thought that was very interesting, I said, well, the Texas board doesn't hear investigations. That's not a function of this board, and as part of our regular board meetings. And they said, so how long do your board meetings last? 30 minutes? I said, no, we still have a lot to do at our board meetings. So I thought that was interesting. Overall, it was very informative and worthwhile, and I hope that we can make it a policy that more people can attend. So we will be skipping agenda item number 20. And we will bring that back up after executive session. Agenda item number 21. Kristen, I think I'll let you take this conversation because you probably color inside the lines better than I do.
Well, thank you for that endorsement, Madam Chair. I really don't have a significant announcement to make with regard to agenda item 21. As we heard earlier in the meeting, our commissioner is going to retire after 10 years of service with the agency, and he won't be gone until after the February board meeting, so rest assured he's not leaving us in the lurch. We have been engaging with the Real Estate Commission, our sister agency, to interview candidates for a successor, and that process, the interviews, we had a first round of interviews and we had a second round of interviews last week, and the process has been turned over back to the commission to talk about the final selection of any candidate from those interviews, and we will await word from the commission on that front.
So is everybody okay with us moving forward with agenda item number, with new business, agenda item 22, as we continue to move through them? And possibly after that, we will go ahead and move into executive session so that we can then cover some of the remaining items.
And agenda item 22 is the discussion and possible action regarding recommendations from the AMC Advisory Committee. This agenda item was included as a placeholder since that committee met after the posting date for our agenda. And you heard from the AMC committee chair, Martha Gale Reed Lynch, that the committee has asked staff to come back with some draft language about how to give AMCs an alternative mechanism for complying with the periodic review requirement. So we anticipate that that will be considered at a future AMC committee meeting and then brought forward as a recommendation from that committee. Beyond that, we have no recommendations to consider today.
I'm good to go. We can take two more.
Okay. Are we waiting?
Certainly.
You were so succinct, Kristen. We're going to tackle another one. We will skip agenda item number 23 and bring that back after executive session. And move on to agenda item number 24.
And I think the commissioner will talk about that, or did you want me to talk about that? Okay.
Take over.
It was a topic of discussion in our workshop yesterday, so I will let the commissioner take over after that.
This item is placed on the agenda because while we received a lot of input from you and we have certainly a sense of your priorities going forward, if you wanted to poll the members and give specific guidance to the staff for something to do between now and the February meeting, this would give you the opportunity to do that. So let me just tell you, based on all of the discussions from yesterday, what the staff will be working on in preparation for February. So after the meeting, we will take all of the ranking information, the input on what you perceived as important, and kind of rank all of those. Of course, we don't know what the final format of the strategic plan will be, even when we meet in February, because quite often, well, I can't remember the last time the governor's office and leadership actually issued the precise instructions for what needed to be included in the plan and the deadline schedule prior to March the 1st. However, we anticipate it will be very similar to what was last time, and that the calendar will be the same. So what we will do is, absent any additional direction from you, is we will take the input from yesterday. There's a couple of things that we did not get to that were provided in your materials that we would like some input, and perhaps the executive committee might be a good place to kind of center that. We did not look at the results, or we did not have the opportunity to discuss the results of the survey that was done. Okay, so that information is in your materials, link to the survey, as well as kind of our synopsis of the top items that came out of each one of those questions. That might provide some additional fodder for you guys to say, okay, this is something that we did not yet provide you guidance on, but we want to make sure that the staff does some additional research and development work on that topic in preparation for February. So that is one item. The second one is that we did not include items that you might raise as hot button items. So while we have, for example, currently pending issues out there about seeking additional guidance from the Attorney General's office with respect to our authority in the realm of evaluations, those kinds of things, you may decide that we need to accelerate that and have perhaps some additional either research or certainly questions ready for the listening tour. So that's another item that might come from either the enforcement committee or the executive committee that really is at your pleasure to say, you know, based on the survey, based on the hot topics that are out there, and based on our own initiative, these are topics that we want to address between now and then. So you've given us some information, and we will prepare what we've typically done in the past is a public survey of stakeholders and the public about their input on proposed items potentially for direct regulatory action. In other words, there needs to be a rule about this, or yes, we think you should go to the legislature about this issue. Okay? So you gave us some input yesterday. We're soliciting additional input from you in the meantime, and then we will be prepared in February with two principal worked products, if you will. And that is, one, the questions to be included on a general survey of stakeholders and the public, and two, a timeline for the listening tour. So both the structure and timeline. So these proposed locations to have open in-person forums that you can attend, and the public can attend and stakeholders can attend all around the state, as well as online opportunities for the same. So we've done that in the past. I think last session, or 2 years ago, we had, in 2018, we had 5 in-person town halls, listening tour locations, and 2 online virtual ones that people could attend from anywhere. So we will begin to put that, well, we will have that for you, the structure and timeline, proposed locations, and the general survey topics based on input you provided to us yesterday and whatever additional input comes directly from the work of the board going forward. So that's why this agenda item appears here. If you wanted to task additional work of committees to provide input to the staff. I'm happy to answer any questions about that process.
No questions. So, yeah, I think that that's probably the way that we will tackle it. I'll sit down and look at those survey results and sort of figure out, do we need to put these to any committees? Do we want to sort of do a general poll of the board? But we'll figure out how to tackle that so that you all have the information so that you can schedule those and move forward before the February meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Since agenda item 25 will be quick, we will do that and then head into executive session.
Well,
We could probably also do 26 before executive session, if that is the board's pleasure. Agenda item 20.
Mrs. Reed Lynch seconded your motion.
Okay. Well, talking about agenda item 25, the board has a policy for considering nominations at the November meeting to create a slate of candidates for the offices of vice chair and secretary of the board that would then be voted on in the February meeting. So even if the candidates today, have a change of heart, we will also accept floor nominations at the February meeting as well. So it is at the board's pleasure as to any nominations that anyone would like to make.
Madam Chair, I've visited with two individuals that have indicated they would like to continue serving. So at this time, I would like to nominate Martha Gale Lynch for vice chair to continue serving in that capacity, and
I'll second that.
and Mr. Chance Bolton for secretary.
I'll second that.
Does this require a motion? No action by the board.
No, I think we've had the nomination and the seconds, so we'll have that slate of candidates and the materials available for you to consider in February. Agenda item 26 is discussion and possible action regarding the Appraisal Subcommittee 2020 Compliance Review. We actually have a separate agenda item for this, although you've heard it mentioned several times before you today. And as you've heard, our policy manager, Vicki Ledbetter Metcalf, with the Appraisal Subcommittee, will arrive here in Texas on February 24th, just prior to our February board meeting. And she will bring with her probably at least one other ASC policy manager to help review our program and give us some guidance and hopefully give us some compliments on how we're doing. And she will make a report at the board meeting in February, but the actual results of the compliance review we won't receive until later, since they have to be considered by the Appraisal Subcommittee as a whole. And that's all I have to say about that.
Kristen, you said earlier that the ASC would not start auditing the AMC program until 2022?
That's correct.
They have already, though, written their policy statements for that compliance review. So we have our marching orders going forward, and that's something that we already have our sights on as far as implementing.
Yes, and the policy statements mirror two rules that were adopted by the FFIEC and the Appraisal Subcommittee. The FFIEC, I know that's another acronym, and I can't tell you what those letters all mean. Federal Financial Institutions Enforcement Council or something. There you go. Essentially, that rule sets forth the requirements that states must have in place to register and regulate appraisal management companies. And we have in the past had the ASC look at our statutes in Chapter 1104, and they have given us I guess I would say, a check mark that we satisfied all the requirements in that AMC rule. They will look at those statutes again when they are here this coming February. So if there's a problem that they have with any of our statutes and rules, then we will have time to adjust those in advance of a return in 2022. Especially since the legislature only meets every other year, and if we need to make any amendments, it would be imperative for us to try to accomplish that in the 2021 legislative session, and perhaps as part of our strategic plan. And the second rule was adopted by the Appraisal Subcommittee, and that relates to the AMC fees for the National Registry. As you heard earlier in the meeting, we will be implementing our fee collection process starting January 1, 2020. There are some states that are already collecting fees and putting AMCs on the registry, and from our standpoint, we just didn't feel it was necessary to do that until absolutely necessary, because the compliance deadline for that is June of 2020. And so we already have that process. It will start January 1st. And so we hope that when they come, they will look at that process and see that we have the mechanisms to comply.
So along those lines, Ms. Reed-Lynch, I might ask that at your next AMC committee meeting that you make it an agenda item to look at the new ASC policy statements with regard to compliance, because our only chance to, if there were something statutorily that we needed to change, would be in 2021. So we would need to have that as part of our plan over the next 12 months.
And, excuse me, but I think that the requirements and the policy statements have already been published, and we have them here, and I have them ready to go.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other discussion about the ASC compliance review coming up? So with that, let me go back here. Number 9.
We could probably do 27. Okay. Simply an approval of a form.
Yep, that'll be easy.
All right. Well, then I will turn it over to Jennifer Wheeler, our Education and Examination Director.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education and Examination Services. The form before you is the ACE credit request form. This form is proposed to create a mechanism for requesting and awarding ACE credit for participation other than as a student in real estate appraisal courses and programs. Staff recommends adoption of this form with any technical or non-substantive changes.
I have a question. Is this something that the Education Committee has seen before?
Yes, it's actually a form to accommodate an existing rule, and the credit is for people who participate in course instruction and approved course development.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton?
I move that the board approve staff's recommendation for the new ACE form.
I second it.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. Jeffries. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
The time is 12:23, and the board will now go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071 and personnel matters pursuant to Texas Government Code 551074. We anticipate returning to open session in approximately 1 hour. The time is now 2:25 p.m. and the board is back from executive session and reconvening in open session. And the remaining agenda items are agenda item 20, agenda item 23, 28, 29, and 30. Is that correct? Fantastic. So we will start with agenda item number 20, discussion and possible action regarding the request for the Attorney General opinion. Kristen? This was an item that was a carry forward from the last board meeting at the request of Mr. Bolton, I believe, or the whole board, but.
Madam Chair and board members, Kristen Warman, your general counsel. Yes, at the September board meeting, the board voted to request an opinion from the Attorney General's office regarding an appraiser's ability to perform evaluations, and the board directed general counsel to draft a request for that Attorney General opinion. You have now considered that draft, and we're able to ask your legal questions of counsel in the executive session. So any discussion you want to have or direction you want to give the staff with respect to moving forward with that request.
But we don't need to make any motions here?
Correct.
Okay, well,
Because the motion was made at the last board.
right, so I would say that since we have now considered it, and let's go ahead and send it, forward it to the Attorney General's office.
Okay. We will make that happen.
Thank you, Kristen. Agenda item number 23 is the discussion and possible action regarding response to the October 8, 2019 letter from Governor Abbott. Kristen, if you'll give us a little bit of background on that letter.
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, on October 8th, the governor sent a letter to all state agencies requesting them to reduce the barriers for obtaining occupational licenses, and then to look at various other ways to reduce the requirements for education and experience to obtain occupational licenses in Texas, and to reevaluate based on legislative changes in the recent legislative session earlier this year, the way agencies review applicants, and applicants, in particular applicants with any criminal convictions. And again, staff has proposed a draft to you that you considered in executive session, and the direction is now before you to give staff the guidance on how to proceed with responding to the governor's letter.
I would like for Ms. Robinson had some great comments and suggestions for the letter, so I would ask that she kind of summarize what were some changes that she wanted to make sure we addressed.
Happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. First of all, I'd think it's a great job that the governor has asked us to address these particular issues and barriers to entry into our field. One thing about the state of Texas is that we are known for great entrepreneurship and great business innovation and economic development, and so a lot of the things that have been asked of us to look at in this letter, it's going to help us all as an agency to move towards what the governor's goals are. There were a couple questions or additional information that I'd like for the staff to try to present the board with. One is regarding reducing the fees for the license application fees to 75% or less than the national average. I would like for the staff to consider getting more data on that, on what the national average may be, so we know exactly where we stand in the state of Texas. If we are not able to really pull the national data, at a minimum, we certainly need to look at the top 14, 15 states that are comparable to the state of Texas, so that we can compare how we are actually doing in terms of our rates. I think that we may be pleasantly surprised that we are doing quite well, and I would like for the governor's office to realize, to know that information from our agency. So that is one area that I'd like to see if we can get additional information on, so that we can make every attempt as a board and as an agency to meet that requirement, or at least get as close as possible to that. The other area with the governor's letter that I wanted to point out was there's a section on there regarding reducing fees for certain individuals that qualify for certain public assistance programs. I know that with our budget, we've had to increase expenditures in order to meet the sunset requirements that was put before us. But I would like for us as a board and an agency to consider perhaps in the future if there is any way that we can work towards the governor's goals in trying to produce some type of reduced fees for that particular population. We do need to probably get more clarification if there are specific public assistance programs he's referring to. But without that type of information, I think it's going to be hard to make a decision if we can or cannot provide fee reductions without knowing exactly which programs we're talking about. So I'd like to get additional clarification information on that to make a decision.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. I appreciate that. For the most part, the letter is what the governor asked us to do were things that we were already in the process of doing because of sunset. But I think it's a great exercise for us as a board to have this type of directive on a regular basis to refocus and to make sure that our policies are aligned with who put us here to begin with. So I think that we're pretty well on our way to finishing this letter. Thank you to Kristen for the work in getting this prepared. And I would say that we should direct staff to complete the letter, and that the executive committee should probably be the ones to look at the final draft and have final say on that.
And that would just require a motion of the full board to delegate that task to the executive committee at the board's pleasure.
Madam Chair, I direct the executive committee to have that final review and oversight of the letter that's going to the governor.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries and a second by Mr. Black. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next, we are looking at agenda item number 28, discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. I'm certain that Ms. Warman has a running list for us. Does anyone else have any items that they would like to put on a future agenda? Hearing none, Move on to agenda item number 29, discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting and workshop dates. We do have our February board meeting has already been scheduled, and that is February 28th, and February 27th, the board will meet for a workshop that will focus on the budget.
Will that be a full day workshop? It's hard for me to, it'll be hard for me to get here at 10 is the only reason I'm asking. But I mean, I can come the night before.
I don't think it needs to be.
It's fine either way. I'm just, if it's at 1, I can leave at 6:30 in the morning.
Okay, so, yeah, so we will, we'll sort of put together an agenda and see how much time we need for those items, but we will make every effort to make it 1 o'clock. I think that works for everybody, so they can. We will excuse you if you need to be late. Do we typically at this time schedule the May board
We
meeting?
do.
Okay.
It has been the practice of the board in the past
Okay.
to have a default meeting date
Okay.
and then schedule around that.
Okay.
So you could schedule long-term, and so that would be the third Friday. So that would be the May 15th in this case. And the good thing, of course, is that's not Mother's Day weekend, and it's also not UT graduation weekend, and it is not Memorial Day. Typically, it falls on one of the other two. It's conflicted by Mother's Day or graduation. In this case, it slips right in between there, so that's probably a good thing.
I think we have a winner.
This is good with your schedule too, Clayton?
Oh, well. Oh, yeah.
Why are you always picking on me?
So at this point, does this work for you, Mrs. Sprinkle?
Yes.
Anybody have any conflicts at this point? Okay, so we will make sure that we run that by the missing board members. Oh, I should also note that Mrs. Reed Lynch had to leave early to catch a flight, so she left. Do we need to excuse her at 2:30? Okay, just for the. So May 15th is the tentative date, barring any changes. Moving on to agenda item number 30, we shall adjourn. The time is 2:36, and the meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board is adjourned.